I stood before the mirror in the bridal salon, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. The white lace bodice clung perfectly to my frame. The long train spilled across the polished floor like a river of snow, and for a fleeting moment, I felt like the princess I had once dreamed of being. My mother's reflection appeared behind me, her hands warm as she adjusted the veil. "Claire, you look exactly the way you imagined when you were little," she whispered. Her voice carried both pride and the faint tremor of a woman about to give her daughter away. I smiled, remembering myself at 10 years old, draping old curtains over my shoulders and declaring that one day I would marry a prince. Back then it was just a fantasy, a fairy tale I told myself at sleepovers. Now, standing there in that gown, I wanted to believe Jacob Whitfield was that prince. For 3 years he had been steady, attentive, every bit the man my parents admired. He never missed a holiday dinner, always brought flowers, always shook my father's hand with confidence. To them, he was the perfect match. To me, he was the man who had promised to make me the happiest woman alive. As the seamstress pinned the final hem, my mother clasped my hands. "Tomorrow you'll be the most beautiful bride in Savannah," she said. Her eyes glistened as though she saw not just the dress, but the years of hope she had poured into me. I pressed my palms against my chest, trying to steady the thundering rhythm of my heart. I told myself it was only joy, the overwhelming anticipation of a life about to begin. On the ride home, we went through the list one more time. Flowers delivered, cake ready, musicians confirmed, the restaurant set for 40 guests. My mother ticked each item off with the practiced air of someone who had planned every detail down to the last napkin. "And the honeymoon?" she asked with a teasing smile. I laughed. Jacob had insisted on keeping that part a surprise. Something unforgettable, he had promised, and I clung to that word like a charm. Everything was in place. The town was already buzzing with talk of the wedding, of how the Mitchells and Whitfields would finally be joined. Yet, as I watched the familiar streets roll by through the car window, a ripple of unease moved through me. Nothing had gone wrong, not a single flaw in months of preparation, and still my hands trembled. Too perfect, my mind whispered. Too seamless to be real. I shook the thought away quickly, forcing a laugh. "All brides get nervous," I told myself out loud, ignoring the cold flicker that had settled deep in my chest. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I wanted so desperately to believe it would be. Back at home, I carefully hung the gown in my closet, letting the soft silk brush against my fingers one last time before I closed the door. Tomorrow, that dress would carry me to the altar. My mother was in my room, folding linens into the cedar chest that had been set aside for me since childhood. "Claire," she said gently, "are you truly ready for married life?" I laughed a little too quickly. "Mom, Jacob and I have talked about everything. He wants children and so do I. We'll live in his apartment until we can buy a bigger place. It will all work out." She nodded, pleased, and then reminded me of what my father had prepared. The downtown condo already signed over in my name. The new car waiting in the driveway, the savings set aside to help us start. It was the kind of dowry every family in Savannah whispered about, and I knew she mentioned it with pride. But hearing it out loud made something twist inside me. "Mom, I don't care about any of that," I said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "What matters is that Jacob and I love each other." The words came easily, but as soon as they left my mouth, a shadow of doubt slipped in. I remembered those moments over the past year that hadn't made sense. The times he didn't answer my calls until hours later, claiming he was busy. The quick way he'd slide his phone back into his pocket whenever I walked into the room. The late nights with friends, always the same excuse. And then there was the way he said, "I love you." Or rather, the way he never said it first. Always in response, never as an offering. Instead, he'd grin and call me Sunshine, as if pet names could replace real words. I shook my head at the memory, chiding myself for inventing problems where none existed. After all, he had proposed, hadn't he? He had planned this wedding. He was going to stand with me tomorrow in front of God and everyone we knew. Still, that nervous flutter wouldn't let go of my chest. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that every bride doubted a little the night before. Maybe the trembling hands, the sleepless thoughts, the cold ache in my stomach were all part of the ritual. The phone rang, breaking my spiral. I grabbed it quickly. Hello. Hey, sunshine. Jacob's voice was warm, calm, everything I needed to hear. How's my bride-to-be? Did you like the dress? I closed my eyes, letting the sound of him wash over me. It's perfect. I can't wait for tomorrow. And I can't wait to make you my wife, he said softly. Forever, Claire. We'll have forever. I smiled into the dark, clutching the phone as if it could anchor me. For tonight, his words were enough to quiet the storm, at least for a little while. I couldn't sit still after our call. Jacob's voice had sounded so tender, so reassuring, that I wanted nothing more than to see him, to share the joy swelling in me. Just half an hour, I told my mother as I slipped on a light coat. The evening air in Savannah was soft and fragrant, laced with honeysuckle and the faint salt of the nearby marsh. My heels clicked against the pavement as I cut through the familiar park. Neighbors called out blessings for tomorrow, and I waved, smiling like the luckiest woman alive. His building came into view, the bricks still fresh from recent painting, the sleepy cat curled in the windowsill downstairs. I climbed the steps 2 at a time, heart racing not from nerves but anticipation. I lifted my hand to knock when Jacob's voice floated through the thin wooden door. Mom, stop worrying. Everything will be fine. I froze. His tone was calm, confident, the way he spoke when convincing a client. His mother's voice answered, quivering. Jacob, are you sure about this? About Claire. I waited for his immediate protest, his declaration of love. Instead, he chuckled, low and careless. I've told you 100 times. Claire is like a sister to me. I've gotten used to her over the years. She's a sweet girl. The word sliced through me. Sister. My chest tightened, but I stayed rooted to the spot, desperate for him to correct himself. But do you love her? His mother pressed. Jacob laughed outright, a sound that made my blood run cold. Love, Mom, is for storybooks. In real life, you have to use your head. You've seen what her parents are giving us, the downtown condo, the car, the money. And her father's connections at City Hall? Priceless. This marriage is security, not romance. The world tilted beneath me. The banister dug into my palm as I gripped it for balance. Every tender smile, every whispered promise, every time he'd brushed my hair from my face, it all cracked like cheap glass. His father's voice joined in, steady and approving. She'll make a good wife. Polite, respectable, from the right family. You're making the right choice. Jacob's next words shattered what little strength I had left. Besides, Samantha Brooks is back in town. Remember her? We were happy together once. With her, I can have passion. With Claire, I get stability. Best of both worlds. Samantha. The name roared in my ears. I remembered her vaguely. Dark hair, older than us, the kind of girl who turned heads in high school. She had been gone for years, and now she was back, sliding seamlessly into the space where my heart had once belonged. Jacob's voice lowered, intimate, but still clear through the door. I'm meeting her tomorrow morning before the ceremony, just to settle things between us. That was enough. My body moved before my mind could catch up, heels clicking too loud as I fled down the stairwell. My vision blurred with tears, my breath coming in shallow gasps. 3 years of believing. 3 years of building dreams on sand. Sister, dowry, Samantha. The words hammered against my skull. By the time I stumbled into the cool night air, the truth had rooted deep inside me. Jacob hadn't loved me at all. Every moment we'd shared had been nothing but a calculated act. And my fairy tale had just ended at his doorstep. I don't remember how I made it back across town. 1 minute I was standing outside Jacob's door with my heart in shreds. The next, I was stumbling into my bedroom, the glow of my wedding gown spilling from the half-open closet like a cruel reminder of what tomorrow was supposed to be. My mother asked if I was all right, her voice warm and concerned. I forced a smile, muttered something about being tired, and slipped past her before she could see my trembling hands. The house was quiet, but inside me, chaos reigned. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling as every moment of the last 3 years replayed in brutal clarity. The way Jacob had taken me to meet his parents far too quickly. Had it been romance or strategy? The questions he'd asked about my father's work, his thinly veiled curiosity about the apartment deed, the savings account, the car. The way he'd avoided saying, "I love you" first, letting me feed him the words, and echoing them back with a smile that, in hindsight, felt rehearsed. How had I been so blind? I had built castles out of sand, convinced myself they were made of stone. For hours, I lay there, caught between two unbearable choices. I could keep silent, marry him, and preserve my family's honor. The guests would smile, the photographs would hang on our walls, my parents would hold their heads high in Savannah society. But I would know. I would wake each morning beside a man who calculated my worth like a ledger, who whispered passion to another woman while telling me I was like a sister. The alternative was worse in its own way, walking away, breaking my parents' hearts, ruining months of preparation, shaming the Mitchell name before the entire town. My mother's proud smile in the bridal salon, my father's meticulous plans, it would all collapse because of me. Near midnight, I dragged myself to the mirror. The woman staring back was pale, eyes swollen, lips trembling. I looked less like a bride and more like a ghost. And yet, behind the ruin, something flickered. A stubborn spark that whispered I was worth more than a bargain struck in the dark. By 4 a.m, I could no longer lie still. I opened the closet, touched the wedding dress one last time, then turned away. I pulled out a small travel bag and packed only what mattered. My passport, some money, the envelope I had saved for the honeymoon. My hands shook as I scribbled a note. "Mom, Dad, forgive me. I can't explain everything now, but I can't go through with this wedding. I love you, Claire." As dawn broke, I placed the note on my pillow and stood for a long moment in the doorway of my childhood room. My heart was breaking, but beneath the devastation, a fragile strength was rising. I could not marry Jacob Whitfield. I would not. The sky was still bruised with the last shadows of night when I slipped out the front door. My shoes barely whispered against the porch steps as I carried the small travel bag that felt heavier with every stride. Behind me, the house slept in silence. My parents dreamed of a daughter walking down the aisle, not one fleeing into the dawn. The streets of Savannah were nearly empty. A milk truck rattled by, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 6. I kept my eyes forward, clutching the handle of my bag as though it were the only anchor I had left. The bus station smelled of diesel and coffee. Its fluorescent lights hummed as I walked up to the counter. 1 ticket to Atlanta, I managed, my voice trembling. The cashier didn't ask questions, just slid the paper stub across the counter. Departure, 8 a.m., 2 hours. Enough time for Jacob to meet Samantha at their old spot. Enough time for my parents to discover the note on my pillow. My stomach turned at the thought. I stepped outside, searching for a quiet corner. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed Hannah. She answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "Claire? What on earth? There's no wedding, I cut in. Hannah, please listen. Tell my parents I'm safe, but I can't marry Jacob." There was a stunned pause. "Claire, what are you talking about? Did something happen?" "I can't explain right now. Just make sure they know I'm alive." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I have to go." I hung up before her questions could pin me down. The guilt came in waves, my mother's tears, my father's fury, the shame they would feel when guests arrived to an empty altar. My whole life they had given me everything, and this was how I repaid them, by running. by destroying the day they had so carefully built. Yet another voice rose inside me, firmer, stronger. How could I stay? How could I vow forever to a man who loved someone else, who saw me only as a transaction? To marry Jacob would have been the greater betrayal, not just of myself, but of the family who raised me to value honesty. When the bus doors finally opened, I climbed aboard, my chest tight with fear. The seats smelled faintly of vinyl and dust. I slid into one by the window and pressed my forehead to the glass. As Savannah rolled away, my reflection stared back, a runaway bride with no plan beyond the next mile. I was terrified of poverty, of loneliness, of being swallowed by a city that didn't know my name. But beneath the fear was something sturdier, almost defiant. I had chosen truth over deception. Whatever waited for me in Atlanta, at least it would be real. The bus rumbled north, each mile carrying me farther from the life I'd known. I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the low country fade into pine forests. My phone buzzed. Hannah's name lit up the screen. My stomach knotted before I answered. "Claire, what did you do?" Her voice was frantic, low as if she had ducked into a hallway to keep from being overheard. "Your parents found the note at 7 this morning. Your mom is beside herself. Your dad, he nearly called the police before I told him you were safe." I swallowed hard, unable to picture their faces without a stab of guilt. "Hannah, I couldn't marry him." "I know, but the guests are arriving, Claire. They're all dressed, gifts in hand, waiting at the restaurant. Jacob's there too. He's telling everyone you're sick, but," she hesitated, "people are whispering. The neighbors are saying you ran away." The words struck like a hammer. Ran away. That was exactly what I had done. In Savannah, news traveled faster than wildfire. By sunset, the entire town would know. Hannah's voice cracked. "Your mother was crying so hard, she couldn't finish a sentence. And your dad, he kept pacing, saying she wouldn't do this without a reason." Jacob looked pale as a ghost, Claire. He tried to laugh it off, but no one believed him. I closed my eyes, letting her words paint the scene I would never see. The table set with flowers and china, the musicians waiting with instruments in hand, 40 guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My parents forced to stand in front of them with nothing but a crumpled note. And Jacob, cornered by whispers, his perfect reputation slipping away as neighbors leaned close to trade theories. "What are they saying about me?" I asked quietly. "That you got cold feet. That maybe you realize something. Some even say Jacob wasn't as perfect as he seemed." Hannah exhaled sharply. "Claire, this is going to be the scandal of the year." I almost laughed, though the sound caught in my throat. "Then let it be. Better a scandal than a lie." The bus hissed to a stop in Atlanta, and the driver called out the station name. I gathered my bag with shaking hands. The city loomed outside, vast and unfamiliar, humming with a life that didn't know me or my story. By afternoon, while Savannah feasted on gossip, I was handing cash to a landlady in a faded bathrobe for a tiny rented room on the edge of town. A single bed, a cracked dresser, and a window overlooking a crooked oak tree. It was nothing like the life I had been promised, but it was mine, and it was honest. The first night in Atlanta passed in a blur of exhaustion and nerves. I lay on the narrow bed of my rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the muffled hum of traffic outside. By morning, the reality hit me. I had no plan, no connections, no safety net. The only work I'd ever done was in my father's office, answering phones, filing documents, a job handed to me because of his position. Out here, none of that mattered. I forced myself into the streets with a borrowed newspaper tucked under my arm, circling classifieds like someone who knew what she was doing. But every posting seemed to require experience I didn't have. My savings, meant for honeymoon, suddenly looked like a fragile lifeline that could vanish in weeks. An internet cafe caught my eye, its windows fogged from the heat of old computers. Inside, a college kid with headphones showed me how to search job sites and fill out applications. My fingers hovered awkwardly over the keyboard as I tried to craft a resume that sounded more substantial than it was. 3 years of administrative assistant under my father's name. Would anyone in this city take that seriously? I sent out resume after resume, heart pounding with each click of the mouse. By the 10th, my palms were slick with sweat. I felt like an imposter wearing borrowed clothes, a child pretending to be an adult. 2 days later, the phone in my tiny room rang. A woman's brisk voice introduced herself from a marketing firm downtown. "We received your application. Can you come in tomorrow for an interview?" My breath caught. Yes, of course. The next morning, I stood in front of a glass building that seemed to scrape the sky. My knees nearly gave out as I crossed the lobby, clutching the strap of my borrowed handbag. In the mirrored elevator, I caught sight of myself. Neatly pressed blouse, hair pulled into a careful bun, makeup hiding the shadows under my eyes. I looked the part, but inside, terror clawed at me. The interview room was sleek, intimidating. Across the table sat a woman in a navy suit, her pen poised above a notepad. "Tell me about your experience." My throat dried. I spoke about handling clients, about organizing schedules, half true, half stretched. But I forced the words out steadily, even when my hands shook beneath the table. When she finally nodded, her tone softened. "We'll start you on a 3-month probation. The salary is modest at first, but if you prove yourself, there's room to grow. Can you begin Monday?" I nearly wept with relief. Yes, absolutely. Walking out of that building, the sunlight felt different, warmer, sharper. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but it was a start, my first fragile victory. And for the first time since I'd left Savannah, I believed I might actually survive here. 3 months passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. I stumbled through the early weeks of my probation, terrified each mistake would expose me as a fraud. But little by little, the fear ebbed. By the end of the 3rd month, my supervisor shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the team." It was the first time in years I felt like I had earned something on my own. That fragile sense of stability shattered the morning Jacob appeared. I had just settled into my small office cubicle when the receptionist buzzed. "There's a man here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway and froze. Jacob stood there in a pressed suit, thinner than I remembered, with a bouquet of white roses, my favorite. His eyes searched mine, uncertain, almost desperate. "Claire," he said softly, as though we were alone in a church instead of a bustling office building. "I had to see you." The air left my lungs. For a moment, I was back at his door in Savannah, listening to the laughter that had gutted me. But I straightened my spine. "How did you find me?" "Your father," he admitted. "It took weeks, but he finally told me. Please, just hear me out." We ended up in a quiet conference room. He placed the flowers between us like a peace offering. "I was a fool," he began. "I said things I didn't mean. I thought marriage was about stability, but when you left, I realized what I lost. I love you, Claire. Truly." I felt my jaw tighten. "Stop. I heard every word you said that night, every single one. I heard you laugh when your mother asked if you loved me. I heard you promise Samantha that you'd meet her on the morning of our wedding." His face went pale. You heard that?" "Yes. And the call. You told her you loved her while you were planning a life with me." My voice was steady now, steel beneath the hurt. "So don't stand here and tell me you suddenly love me now that I've walked away." He leaned forward, desperation leaking into his voice. "I was wrong. I thought I could have both. But I swear losing you showed me the truth. I want only you." I shook my head slowly. "No, Jacob. You didn't lose me because you made a mistake. You lost me because you never saw me as more than a convenient purchase. And I deserve more than that." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who had betrayed me, but as someone small, powerless against the choices he'd made. Later that week, I shared coffee with Roman, a colleague from the marketing team. He didn't bring flowers or grand speeches. He asked how my presentation had gone, listened when I vented about deadlines, and laughed at my nervous jokes. There were no masks with him, no hidden motives. Just honesty. Walking back to the office beside him, I realized Jacob no longer had power over me. The past had knocked at my door, and I had finally closed it. A year passed before I set foot in Savannah again. My mother's birthday drew me home, and though the thought of returning filled me with unease, I knew it was time. Atlanta had become my world. Work, friends, a modest but comfortable apartment. But Savannah was still where I belonged to two people who loved me more than anyone. When the train pulled into the station, I spotted my parents waiting. My mother cried when she saw me, clutching me as though I might vanish again. My father held me longer than usual, his silence speaking volumes. They had forgiven me, though scars lingered. That weekend, relatives gathered for a small celebration. Old neighbors eyed me with a mix of curiosity and something else, respect maybe for the way I had carved out a life after the scandal. Their whispers no longer stung. I had survived them. It was in a quiet cafe the next day that I saw him. Jacob. He stood by the counter, holding hands with Samantha Brooks. A wedding ring gleamed on her finger. They looked settled, comfortable, even happy in the way couples sometimes are when they've finally gotten what they wanted. He noticed me first. For a moment, tension flickered in his eyes, but then he managed a polite smile. "Claire," he said softly. Samantha's gaze sharpened, protective. I nodded, calm. "Jacob." "Samantha." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. There was an awkward pause before he introduced her as his wife. She extended her hand, and I took it. "Congratulations," I said. "I truly hope you're happy." The words weren't forced. To my surprise, I meant them. The bitterness I once carried had dissolved into something else. Acceptance. What happened between us was finished. A closed chapter that no longer dictated my future. As we parted ways, I walked out into the Savannah sun and felt lighter than I had in years. Seeing him didn't ignite rage or longing. It simply confirmed what I already knew. I had let go. That evening, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with the smell of my mother's peach cobbler drifting through the air, I reflected on the woman I had become. I wasn't the naive girl who once measured her worth by a man's attention. I was someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing, who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over illusion. Back in Atlanta, my life with Roman unfolded slowly. He never rushed me, never demanded promises I wasn't ready to make. We shared dinners after work, long conversations about our pasts, even comfortable silences. His honesty was his greatest gift, and it built a foundation steadier than any dowry or social standing. As the train carried me back to Atlanta after the visit, I looked out the window at the receding fields and knew I had finally found peace. Savannah was part of my story, but it no longer defined me. The future was mine to write, and for the first time I trusted myself to write it well. The train slid into Atlanta just as the evening sun turned the skyline gold. From my seat by the window, I watched the glass towers shimmer like beacons, calling me back to the life I had built here. When I stepped onto the platform, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not just for returning to a familiar place, but for knowing that this city, once so foreign and terrifying, was now home. Walking through the crowded station, I thought about the girl who had fled Savannah a year ago, trembling, clutching a single bag, convinced she was destroying everything her parents had given her. That girl had believed she was a coward, a runaway. But standing here now, steady on my own 2 feet, I understood the truth. She wasn't running from responsibility. She was running toward freedom. At my apartment, the key turned easily in the lock. The small living room, the second-hand couch, the kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee grounds. It all carried the weight of my effort, my choices. For the first time in my life, everything around me was mine not because of family connections or dowries, but because I had earned it. My parents had embraced me during my visit, and the guilt I carried for so long had softened. They loved me, even if they hadn't understood me at first. They had given me roots, but I had given myself wings. That night, Roman stopped by with takeout in his hands and his usual easy smile. He never tried to dazzle me with grand gestures. Instead, he offered something Jacob never had: honesty. We ate on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, laughing over stories from work. At one point, he reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. Not because I felt obligated, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. It struck me then how different this love was from the one I had nearly chained myself to. Roman wasn't a calculation, a trade, or a performance. He was simply a man who chose me, and whom I chose back. No masks, no bargains, just us. Before bed, I stood at the window, watching the city lights burn against the night sky. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost radiant. I thought of the dress, still hanging in my childhood closet, unworn. Once it had symbolized everything I thought I needed. Now it was only fabric. The real gown I wore was made of the choices I had stitched together with trembling hands and stubborn courage. People might still whisper that I was the bride who ran. Let them. I knew better. I wasn't a runaway. I was a woman who refused to live a lie. My escape wasn't madness. It was courage. And because of that, my future at last was real. The knock at my door was sharp, almost angry, cutting through the Portland rain like a blade. I had just set my coffee down, the steam still curling in the dim light of my corner apartment overlooking the Willamette River. When I opened the door, they stood there. Margaret in a tailored coat that screamed silent judgment, Nathan lounging beside her with that infuriating smirk that always made me feel like an inconvenience in my own life. "Madeline," my mother said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation, her perfume sharp and invasive. "We need to talk." Nathan brushed past me too, his boots dripping muddy water onto my hardwood floor. I stood frozen for a second, the cold air from the hallway swirling around my ankles, carrying the familiar chill of obligation and guilt. They acted like they owned the place, like every piece of furniture, every square foot of space was theirs to assess and claim. Margaret's gaze flickered over my apartment with thinly veiled disdain, as if calculating what could be sold off if necessary. Nathan, meanwhile, perched himself on my kitchen counter, picking at an apple from the fruit bowl like a lazy king surveying his domain. I crossed my arms, bracing myself. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Margaret smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "It's simple, darling. Nathan has a new business opportunity. Very promising. He just needs a little startup capital. You're doing well now." Her eyes gleamed with something that wasn't pride. It was hunger. I felt it in the air. Thick and oily, the same old expectation. Give. Sacrifice. Bleed. Nathan chuckled, tossing the apple from hand to hand. "Come on, Mads," he said casually. "It's not a big deal. Just a little help for family. You know, like always." I stared at them, the room closing in, the windows fogging up from the sudden surge of heat in my chest. Memories crashed into me. Birthdays where I handed over my gift money so Nathan could attend soccer camp, late nights working 2 jobs while he wrecked his car and needed another, skipped proms, missed chances, dreams postponed indefinitely because Nathan always came first. I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of 32 years settling on my shoulders. "No," I said quietly but firmly. Margaret blinked, genuinely surprised, as if the idea of me refusing had never once entered her calculations. Her lips tightened into a hard, bloodless line. "Don't be selfish, Madeline. This is what family does." I laughed, a hollow sound in the still air. "When have you ever done anything for me?" I asked, my voice cracking like thin ice. Margaret's face flushed, but she recovered quickly, her voice dropping into that patronizing tone I knew too well. "We raised you. We gave you everything." I took a step closer, feeling something inside me burn brighter than fear for the first time in years. "You raised me to survive you," I said, each word falling heavy between us, and I did. "Without you—" Nathan scoffed from the counter, tossing the half-eaten apple into the sink. "Jesus, Mads, you think you're better than us now?" I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. "No," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I've always known I was." The silence that followed was colder than the rain. Margaret's eyes glittered with rage. "Blood is blood," she hissed. "Without us, you'd be nothing." I moved to the door, opening it wide to the dreary, wet city beyond. "Then you'll be fine without me," I said, nodding toward the hallway. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Margaret stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Nathan muttered something under his breath, but followed her out, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that echoed in my chest. I leaned against the door, breathing hard, the smell of rain and anger thick around me. It was over, I thought, wiping my hands on my jeans. Finally, after all these years, it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Monday came with a gray sky heavy enough to crush the city. I was reviewing contracts at the office when the receptionist, pale and hesitant, approached my desk. In her trembling hands was an envelope, thick and official-looking. "I'm sorry, Madeline," she whispered, eyes darting away. "You need to sign for it." A man in a dark suit waited behind her, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. I scrawled my name mechanically, my fingers stiff and cold. He tipped an imaginary hat and left, leaving the scent of smug satisfaction in his wake. I retreated into the break room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like 1,000 tiny wasps, and tore open the envelope. The first line hit me like a punch to the gut: petition for conservatorship based on mental incompetence. I sat down hard, the plastic chair screeching against the tile, the document trembling in my hands. I wasn't just being pushed aside. They were trying to erase me legally, declare me unfit, take control of my life, my finances, everything I had clawed and bled to build. The words on the page blurred, but the memories they triggered were sharp and brutal. Childhood flashes, Nathan setting the kitchen curtains on fire and being praised for his creativity while I was grounded for forgetting a homework assignment. Margaret telling neighbors how brilliant Nathan was while pretending I barely existed. Birthday parties where he blew out the candles on my cake. I learned young that love in our family was a transaction, a ledger constantly balancing, and my balance was always in the red. But I had also learned something else. Survival required receipts. At 11, after Margaret accused me of stealing her bracelet, a bracelet Nathan had pawned for weed money, I started recording everything, hiding tiny recorders in sock drawers, backing up files on flash drives, emailing copies to accounts they didn't know existed. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. And now that arsenal was my lifeline. I raced home through the Portland drizzle, my mind a storm of fear and fury. Inside my apartment, I slammed the door and locked it behind me, as if I could physically keep the betrayal at bay. Dropping the envelope on my kitchen table, I yanked my old laptop from the closet, the battered machine whirring to life with the loyalty of an old soldier. I opened the files, carefully labeled gaslighting, threats, manipulation. My own voice, young and shaking, filled the room from a recording. "I didn't take it, Mom. I swear." Margaret's icy response followed. "Don't embarrass us, Madeline. Just admit it. Help Nathan." His laughter echoed faintly in the background. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't unstable. I had just been raised by people who needed me to believe I was. My hands stopped trembling. I stared out the window at the city blinking through the rain, at the future I had built with no thanks to them, and I knew. They had come for me with lies, but they had taught me how to fight. I wouldn't let them win. Not this time. I picked up my phone, heart hammering against my ribs. There was only one person I could trust with this. Someone who had seen the cracks long before I ever dared admit they were there. Eli answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and steady. "Madeline, What's wrong? I exhaled shakily, the words burning as they tumbled out. They're trying to put me under conservatorship. They're saying I'm unfit. Silence crackled across the line. Then Eli swore softly under his breath. Send me everything, he said, his voice like steel. Every file, every recording. We're going to bury them. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because it was over, but because I knew the real battle was just beginning, and I was ready. The city hummed with the low growl of distant traffic as I sat on my living room floor, laptop open. Files spread around me like the pieces of a shattered life. Eli was already working, his tech skills slicing through data management like a hot knife through butter. First things first, he said. Typing rapidly, we organize everything. Chronology matters. He wasn't just calming me, he was building a wall between me and the storm that was coming. I pulled a battered photo album from a storage bin, one-eyed unearthed from my parents' attic years ago, mostly filled with half-forgotten Christmases and stiff, uncomfortable family portraits. Nestled between faded pictures was a Polaroid that made my breath hitch, a younger Margaret, smiling awkwardly beside a woman with my same sharp jawline, my same dark eyes. The back of the photo, written in rushed, fading ink, read, Claire. Don't tell Derek. My hands shook slightly as I stared at the name. Claire Montrose, a name I had heard only once in a hushed argument behind a closed door, a name erased from family stories like a stain scrubbed too hard. A quick search confirmed it. Claire Montrose, family law attorney, operating out of Beaverton, just a 20-minute drive west. I closed the laptop, grabbed my keys, and drove into the rain, the photo clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Beaverton blurred by outside the windshield, suburban streets wet and glistening under the endless Oregon drizzle. The receptionist at the law office hesitated when I walked in, dripping water onto the polished hardwood floor. Do you have an appointment? She asked, polite but wary. I swallowed, nerves fraying. No, I said, holding out the photo, but it's about Margaret Harper. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or warning. Wait here, she said, disappearing behind a heavy oak door. 10 agonizing minutes later, the door opened and Claire stepped out. She was older now, silver streaks cutting through her dark hair, but her posture was as straight as a blade. Her gaze, when it landed on me, softened slightly. Madeline, she said, her voice low and cautious. I didn't think Margaret kept this photo. I handed it to her without a word, watching as her fingers tightened around the edges. We sat across from each other in her small but elegant office, papers rustling quietly as I pulled out the conservatorship petition. Claire scanned it quickly, her expression hardening by the second. This is serious, she said, finally, tapping the document with a manicured finger. They're not just trying to control your money. They're trying to erase your autonomy, your future. I met her eyes without blinking. That's why I'm here. I need someone who knows how they operate, someone they already tried to silence. Claire leaned back slowly, studying me. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, might tell me to run and never look back. But then she smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. You came to the right place, she said. Do you have evidence? I opened my laptop, my hand steadier now. I showed her the folders. Voicemails, texts, financial documents, recordings of Nathan's drunken rants, Margaret's chilling manipulation. Her eyes sharpened with every file I opened, like a hawk zeroing in on prey. Send me everything, she said, her voice like iron wrapped in velvet. We'll file a response, request an independent evaluation, and start dismantling their lies piece by piece. Relief crashed over me so violently I almost sagged into the chair. I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, I had an adult in my corner who wasn't trying to use me, fix me, or break me. But we needed more. Back in my apartment, Eli was waiting, sorting through more digital evidence. You know who else you should talk to? He said, glancing up. Jenna Lawson, Nathan's ex. She saw things you might not even know about. The thought of reaching out made my stomach knot with old shame, but necessity was a sharper blade than fear. I found Jenna's contact info tucked away in an old email thread, took a deep breath, and sent the message. Her reply came faster than I expected. Come by. I have something you'll want to hear. The next morning, I stood outside her small apartment complex, the rain still clinging to the sidewalks like regret. Jenna opened the door, arms crossed, expression wary. She looked different, harder, sharper than I remembered. Why now? She asked without preamble. I met her gaze evenly. Because you know what kind of person Nathan is. And I think you're tired of pretending you don't. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she stepped aside, letting me in without another word. Jenna's apartment was small, clean, and smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. A dog barked from a back room, its nails clicking against the hardwood floors. She tossed a hoodie over a laundry pile and sat across from me, legs bouncing nervously. I don't know why I'm doing this, she muttered, rubbing her palms against her jeans. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Because you know the truth, and you're tired of carrying it alone. For a long moment, Jenna just stared at me, her eyes hollow with old wounds. Then she nodded. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, at your parents' place. She swallowed hard. Nathan was drunk, bragging about your promotion, saying you thought you were better than everyone. Margaret was right there, egging him on. She stood abruptly, rummaging through a drawer and pulling out a battered flash drive. I had my phone on me. Baby monitor picked it up, caught the whole thing. She held it out to me like it burned. Take it. My fingers brushed hers as I grabbed the drive, its weight heavier than its size. There's more, Jenna said, voice breaking. Margaret told me you were unstable, that if Nathan needed to, he could handle you. Legally. She said they had a plan. My stomach twisted into a knot, so tight it felt like I couldn't breathe. I closed my fist around the flash drive, feeling its sharp edges bite into my skin. Did you believe her? I asked, barely above a whisper. Jenna's face crumpled slightly. No, not really. But I didn't do anything either. I left with the flash drive clutched like a weapon, the Portland rain seeping into my jacket as I ran back to my car. Back home, Eli was sprawled on the floor, sifting through files when I burst through the door. His eyes widened at the sight of me. What did you find? He asked. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop without answering, letting the recordings fill the room. Nathan's drunken voice, Margaret's cold reassurances, the toxic symphony of a family building their case against me years before they ever filed a petition. This voicemail, Eli said, pointing to a new file. Listen. I clicked it, and Margaret's voice oozed from the speakers. You're just like your aunt, always ruining everything. I blinked, ice sliding down my spine. My aunt? Eli's eyebrows knitted together. Claire, he said slowly. She exists. They lied about her. The realization was a thunderclap. If they lied about Claire, what else had they buried? We worked late into the night, sorting files, cross-referencing dates, building a digital fortress of evidence. As I sifted through an old box of documents, a battered manila envelope slipped free and fell open at my feet. Inside, a crumbling birth certificate from 1995. My name, Derek Harper, listed as my father, but clipped to it, almost forgotten, was a notarized letter in Margaret's sharp, angry handwriting, hinting that Thomas Green, a man I had never met, might actually be my biological father. The world tilted under my feet. I sank into the couch, the paper fluttering in my lap like a dead leaf. All these years, they had tied me to Derek for one reason, to claim me as part of the Harper family trust. If I wasn't legally Derek's daughter, I wasn't entitled to anything. And worse, they had no standing to file conservatorship against me. I drove back through the night, the rain a relentless drumbeat on the windshield, heading toward the place I had sworn never to return, the Harper house in Eugene. I still had a key. Margaret never thought I'd use it against her. The house was dark when I slipped inside, the smell of lemon cleaner thick and cloying. Upstairs, The attic door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight. I remembered the attic from childhood, forbidden, dangerous, filled with boring old papers Margaret said no one should touch. I found the safe behind a stack of plastic Christmas bins, exactly where I remembered. My fingers spun the dial, heart hammering in my ears. Click. It opened. Inside, yellowed tax returns, legal documents, and another envelope labeled in shaky handwriting. For Madeline. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a letter. Claire's handwriting. Madeline, if you're reading this, I failed you, but you're stronger than they ever believed. You deserve the truth. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled out the rest of the contents. Photographs, notarized affidavits, hidden paternity test results. Thomas Green, my real father. Proof that Margaret had forged documents to siphon trust money through me to Nathan. The attic seemed to close in around me, the air thick with mold and betrayal. I stuffed the papers into my bag and fled down the stairs, the old floorboards groaning under my weight. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for the truth of who I was, and I wasn't going to lose. The next morning smelled like betrayal masked with lemon cleaner. I pulled into the driveway of the Harper house, my stomach twisting with a nausea that no amount of deep breathing could ease. Court-mandated mediation. Claire had insisted it was strategic. Let them talk, she had said, her voice sharp. They'll hang themselves faster than we ever could. I adjusted the folder in my hands, thick with evidence, and stepped into the lion's den. Margaret greeted me at the door with a brittle smile. Madeline, she purred, you look tired. I stepped past her without answering, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, but I forced myself forward. Derek sat slumped in the living room, clutching a chipped mug, refusing to meet my eyes. Nathan leaned against the fireplace, his grin lazy and cruel. The mediator, a composed woman in her 50s, opened her notebook. Let's begin. Margaret started immediately, her voice syrupy sweet. We love our daughter very much, she said, laying a trembling hand over her heart, but she's been making reckless decisions, isolating herself, spending irresponsibly. We're just trying to help. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer audacity. Like accusing us of theft, Margaret added, tilting her head, her eyes glinting with calculated innocence. I slid a printed email across the table, the edges crisp and cold. It was dated 2 years ago, Margaret asking me to co-sign a $20,000 loan for Nathan. When I refused, her reply was brutal. You're a selfish little girl who will die alone. The mediator's eyebrows lifted slightly. Margaret's smile faltered, but she didn't break. I pulled out another document, a text from Nathan. Send me $5,000 or I'll ruin you. Don't test me. I laid it on top of the email like a dagger. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. You're blowing this out of proportion, Derek mumbled, staring into his coffee. I turned toward him, heart pounding, hand slipping into my bag for the grenade I'd been waiting to drop. Did you know, I said slowly, that I'm not your biological daughter? The room froze. Nathan straightened up, confused. Margaret went stark white. Derek blinked like I'd slapped him. What are you talking about? He stammered. I didn't flinch. Margaret had an affair with Thomas Green. I'm his daughter. You changed my birth certificate in 1995 to tie me to the Harper Trust. You filed for conservatorship based on a fraud. Margaret shot up from her chair, her voice shrill and cracking. This is ridiculous. She's lying. The mediator held up a hand, her face tight. Let's pause. No, I said, my voice slicing through the tension. We finish this. Margaret leaned across the table, her face twisted with rage. You think you can destroy us? You're nothing but a bitter little girl with daddy issues. I stood, gathering the folder into my arms. No, I said, voice calm and deadly. I'm a woman with evidence. I turned to Derek one last time. Did you know? I asked. He looked at me, real fear dawning in his eyes, and then he looked away. Margaret answered for him, her voice dripping venom. He knew. He just didn't care, as long as the money stayed where it should. Claire's voice, cool and lethal in my memory, whispered, "They underestimate you. Not anymore." 3 days later, the King County Courthouse loomed overhead, its columns slick with rain. Inside, the smell of polished wood and fear permeated the air. Margaret, Nathan, and Derek sat stiffly at the petitioner's table, their lawyer. A smug man named Carson rose, straightening his tie with false confidence. "Your Honor," Carson began, "the Harper family seeks conservatorship out of concern for Madeline Harper's mental well-being. She has demonstrated erratic, paranoid behavior." Claire rose to her feet before he could finish, her voice slicing the air. "Objection, Your Honor. No medical evidence has been submitted. No history of instability. My client maintains a $125,000 annual income. No outstanding debts, no criminal record." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Proceed." Carson floundered, muttering about a $2,000 couch I had purchased. Claire leaned forward smoothly. "My client's income supports that purchase. The Harper family's financial struggles stem not from Madeline, but from Mr. Nathan Harper's failed ventures." A low ripple of amusement swept the courtroom. Margaret took the stand next, her face the perfect mask of maternal sorrow. "We tried to help her," she said tearfully, "but she pushes us away. She imagines threats where there are none." Claire, unbothered, submitted Exhibit A, the Thanksgiving recording. Nathan's drunken voice played out across the courtroom speakers. "Madeline thinks she's better than us. We'll show her." Margaret's voice could be heard egging him on. The gallery gasped. Savannah, Jenna's real name, testified next. Calmly, brutally, she described Margaret telling her Madeline was unstable, that Nathan would handle her if needed. She described Nathan draining their joint account, calling her worthless, threatening violence. Finally, Claire submitted the DNA results. The judge flipped through the papers, her face impassive. Results confirm Madeline Harper is not the biological daughter of Derek Harper. Petitioners lack legal standing. Conservatorship petition is denied. Margaret stood so fast her chair screeched across the floor. "This is slander. This is science," Claire said, voice like the crack of a gavel. The courtroom exploded into chaos, but for me, standing in the center of it all, there was only silence, sweet, victorious silence. Victory wasn't clean. It left a hollow ache in its wake, the way a house feels after the furniture has been stripped away. I stood on the courthouse steps, the rain misting against my skin, the judgment echoing in my ears. Conservatorship denied, fraud exposed, lies shattered. But the family that should have loved me was gone. Maybe they had never been real to begin with. Weeks passed. Life didn't snap back into place the way I thought it would. I boxed up old photo albums, shredded letters that once meant something, donated trinkets and heirlooms that no longer held power over me. My apartment grew barer by the day, each empty space a strange kind of freedom and a strange kind of grief. Claire met me at her office one last time, a bottle of good red wine and 2 heavy glasses waiting. We signed the final papers together, severing every last legal tie binding me to the Harper name. "Are you sure about letting all this go?" she asked as I sealed the last box, filled with faded awards, journals too painful to reread, scraps of a life spent surviving instead of living. I looked at the pile, felt the old wounds pulse once more, and then fade. "It's not who I am anymore," I said quietly. Claire smiled, a rare softness in her sharp gaze. "You could write a book, you know. People would eat it up." I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. At my desk that night, the idea wouldn't leave me alone. I opened a notebook, pen hovering over the blank page. Then I wrote, "This is not about revenge. This is about reclamation." Eli leaned over my shoulder, grinning. "There's your title," he said, and maybe for the first time it really was. Some wounds don't close with time, They close when you stop letting the people who made them keep carving into you. Weeks later, in a grocery store parking lot, life threw me one last curveball. I spotted her, Margaret, sitting alone in her car, the engine idling. She looked older somehow, smaller. The lines etched around her mouth were deeper now, carved by bitterness and fear. I could have walked away. I should have, but something made me stop. She rolled down the window, rain spattering between us. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Madeline," she said, almost a whisper, "I didn't know how to love you." Her eyes glistened with tears she might have once believed she could weaponize. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "You didn't keep me safe," I said softly. "You kept me small." A sob escaped her lips, sharp and ugly. "Do you hate me?" The old Madeline, the Madeline raised to swallow hurt and serve it back as silence, might have said no, might have lied to make her mother comfortable. But not this Madeline. Not anymore. "I don't hate you," I said calmly, "but I don't forgive you. Not yet." Her window rolled up slowly, like a curtain falling on a final, failed performance. I turned away, the weight sliding off my shoulders as easily as rain down a windshield. And this time I didn't look back. That night, an unknown number buzzed on my phone. No name, no message, just silence on the other end. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then blocked it, without hesitation, without anger, without fear. Earlier that day, the district attorney's office had called. Nathan was facing wire fraud charges. Margaret was under investigation for perjury. Their empires of lies were crumbling, not because I screamed the loudest, but because I had stood the longest. At my desk, I opened my notebook again. The words poured out faster this time, steady and sure. I wrote for every woman who was told she was too much, too loud, too emotional. For every child erased to make room for a brother's failures. For every survivor who was forced to carry a family's shame like a second skin. I didn't burn their empire for revenge. I burned it to reclaim the girl they tried to erase and to build a life unapologetically mine. My name is Madeline Harper, and this is only the beginning.